The Suicide Squad is back in action, but is this one to die for? I'll let you know right now. Hello everybody and welcome to another review here on the channel. I am still on the road here in Los Angeles, so pardon the hotel room backdrop, but that will not keep me from doing my review for James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, the second movie in the Suicide Squad series after 2016's Suicide Squad. You know, these naming conventions are just getting ridiculous. I think from now on we're probably just going to call this one The Good One, because this is definitely a huge improvement from the Suicide Squad movie that we got, believe it or not, 5 years ago in summer of 2016. This is written and directed by James Gunn, in case you hadn't heard, and the movie returns stars like Margot Robbie, Jai Courtney, Viola Davis, and Joel Kinnaman to the roles that they played in 2016's movie, but adds to that new faces like Idris Elba as Bloodsport, John Cena as Peacemaker, Michael Rooker as Savant, Daniela Melchior as Ratcatcher 2, David Dastmalchian as Polka Dot Man, and many, many more to supplement the squad from the first movie. And this version of the Suicide Squad pays off the premise in a way that the first movie couldn't or wouldn't, because that's really what these characters are supposed to be. If the name The Expendables wasn't already taken by a film franchise, that would do just as well for this movie. These characters are supposed to be able to go at any place at any time, and that's what you see in this movie. I don't think it's a big revelation when you have 20 plus quote-unquote main cast members that not all of them make it to the end of the film. But what this film does very smartly, it dispatches them in ways and at times that you don't necessarily expect. It keeps you on your toes, and it keeps you engaged in these characters, because when you establish that the rules are that there are no rules, you're actually worried about these characters, and that's a change from what you see in most of these franchise films. You're pretty self-assured unless you're in an Avengers Endgame type situation that everybody's going to make it out alive, especially the first 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 names that are billed, because they want to keep making sequels, etc. The rules are broken. The rules are made to be broken in this movie, and that injects some suspense. James Gunn is having a field day here, and the R rating that the Suicide Squad has, which is reportedly a condition of James Gunn signing on to do this movie, loosens the shackles. It loosens the shackles both of the first Suicide Squad film and the shackles that James Gunn has had on doing his PG-13 work over at Marvel. Here he has full license to be as weird and crazy and gross and bloody as he wants to be, and yet the movie doesn't feel gratuitous. It doesn't feel like James Gunn is just going nuts because he can. The moments are carefully selected, they're well executed, they're often shocking, but they also nearly always come with a just instinctual laughter. Sometimes it's laughter of disbelief, sometimes of actual humor. It would have been easy to go overboard here and really just kind of lose sight of the greater project by being able to have this kind of budget to do this kind of mayhem, and yet James Gunn does show restraint in the excess of this movie. Paradoxically, despite having more than a dozen extra cast members, and that's just amongst the Suicide Squad itself, the characterization is better in this movie than in 2016's Suicide Squad. You get a better grip on who all of these people are. They're more well-rounded. You actually are invested in them and in what they want. You understand what their motivations are, and that's not because they have complicated scenes of every one of them giving big backstories about their lives. It's just that the writing in this movie is very efficient. It's character-based. It's not always storyline-based, and it just goes to show that you don't have to sacrifice spectacle to get character, because you establish in this movie these different personas of all of these different stars, your Pete Davidsons and your John Cenas and your Nathan Fillions, your Michael Rookers and Joel Kinnaman. You're even reintroducing some of these older characters, and you understand who each of these characters is, but at the same time, we're not at a 3-hour running time. They're still able to have the big third act and everything else that you would expect from one of these movies. Efficiency in writing and knowing who these characters are is so important. In addition to great characters and great jokes, this movie also just looks great, and James Gunn reteams with his Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 cinematographer Henry Bram to deliver a Technicolor dream world. It has so much of the the glossy sheen of the pages of a graphic novel that you can practically smell the ink. The style on this film is so strong. Now, it's not a perfect film. It is a little bit messy structurally. The second act in particular with Harley's character, I didn't feel like the movie quite knew what to do with her, and that's because there are a lot of moving pieces. You're moving some pieces onto the board, you're moving some pieces off of the board. I feel like there was an obligation on the part of probably the studio, perhaps James Gunn, because Margot Robbie's in the movie, to give her more to do in this film than maybe she had to do in the middle, and so it feels a little bit forced and a little bit of a side quest, and the jokes were a little hit and miss for me. I didn't laugh at every single one of them. It's no surprise in a James Gunn movie like this that the jokes come fast and furious, but they were more hit than miss, a little more spotty than I'd anticipated though. But the Suicide Squad really is unlike any other comic book based movie that we've seen except for maybe one or two, and I mean that in a good way. By removing the limitations that were placed on the previous projects, we get the most out there, insane, sometimes surreal Suicide Squad movie that you can imagine, which is what it feels like we should have gotten the first time. It's almost as if hiring a talented director, giving him the autonomy to execute his vision, and then trusting that filmmaker that they are going to deliver a movie that audiences want to see is the recipe for making a really successful movie. Who would have thought? Of the new members of the Suicide Squad, I will say that David Dastmalchian's Polka Dot Man is a standout, proving that you can still be the crazy one in a group of hardened criminals. Daniela Melchior and Idris Elba also ground the film in the closest I would say that it gets to humanity, and I bought into their characters the most. And then we have King Shark. King Shark is an absolute delight. Much like Groot, James Gunn has taken this fully CGI character and yet been able to give it a sense of wonder. You like King Shark because he has this childlike way of looking at the world, again, in a very similar way to why we love Groot from the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And it's a great combination of the visual effects artists that bring King Shark to life, of Steve Agee, who was the King Shark on set, and then the voice of King Shark, who I'm not really sure has been made public, so I'm not going to say here who it is, but it's the combination of all three that really bring this character to life. I think that King Shark is going to be the breakout character from this movie because he is so adorable and just so easy to root for. So while I did have a few issues with the humor and the tone and the structure of the film, I largely had a really good time with the Suicide Squad. As I said, it is a massive improvement over the first film. And so many times we've seen in movies like this where the third act just brings the movie down, just completely sinks it down to the depths. Here, the third act lifts this movie up. It is the culmination of all the craziness that we have seen thus far. And it would have been, if they hadn't nailed the tone of this movie, it would have been way too much, way too weird. Almost like it didn't even fit in any kind of movie whatsoever. But it fits perfectly in this movie. And it just shows that James Gunn has so successfully set the tone for this film, what we'll accept as an audience, what we won't accept as an audience, and brings this whole thing to such an insane crescendo that you walk out of the theater, or at least I did, with a big smile on my face. This was a great return to the world of the Suicide Squad for me. I also think that it endorses the strategy of loosening the strings between these DC films, allowing them to breathe and have a life of their own. The fact that this movie didn't have to bend over backwards and try to acknowledge things from the last film. They took the things they wanted to take. They didn't take other things. I really, really, really enjoyed this movie. It is up in my top, easily upper echelon of the newer DC films, the worlds of DC or DCEU or whatever you want to call it, this new universe of DC films. And I think that if you were a fan of the DC movies, if you're a fan of comedies, if you're a fan of action, if you're a fan of these actors, I think you're going to have a really good time, because I certainly had a really good time with the Suicide Squad. It's a big recommendation for me. It will be in theaters this Friday. It will also be available streaming on HBO Max day and date on Friday. You can check it out either way. Thank you so much for watching my review. If you want to see even more of what I'm up to, you can check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Dan Murrell. And please check out everything else going on here on the channel. We'll be covering the box office for this movie on Monday's Charts with Dan. I also do reviews, breaking news. I will be getting back to my live shows eventually. I've had a very weird last few weeks of Schmodown competitions and travel and podcast work and everything else, but I do enjoy doing those live shows, so stay tuned tuned. We will be getting back to those in the near future, as well as some other stuff coming to the channel that I want to work on, and even more reviews. I'm just having a really great time, and this movie is a really great time. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time. Bye.